everyone, it's Plastic EP from Melbourne, Australia. Let me tell you, I got a really great author, right? Dana KLOSNER, and let me tell you, she's just written a fantastic book. Beatlemania lives on. You can see it. What a fantastic book. Everyone go out and get it. Now, Dana, tell everybody now about what the book is actually about.
So it's about the legacy of the Beatles 60 years on in the 21st century and the crazy things people do to this day to get close to the Beatles, feel connected to the Beatles. They're second and third generation fans that know more than we do about the facts behind their story. There's tribute bands that have been together longer than the Beatles ever were and have their own fans. There's a Broadway show in the works right now about John Lennon's adolescence. And it's just the fact that that the story just goes on and on. It's an anthology. So what I did was I did 70 international interviews and made essays about each person's story. So it's individual stories with the theme of how the Beatles connect the world and peace and love and all that stuff.
Now, Dana, I've got a special surprise for you. I'm going to show you a book that I guarantee you haven't seen. And what it is a book about John Lennon, and it's about one of his plays that was there in London. It was called John Lennon, right, in His Own Right. Tell me if you've seen this before in your life.
I have not seen that.
That's right. And that was in the 60s.
Well, I know about his book, but you're saying...
No, this was a play. This was an actual play in London. And see the cover in the book? It's pretty good, so I thought I'd show you that. There you go, just to show you.
Beautiful.
It says, John Lennon in his own right. It says John Lennon play in his own right. Adrian Kennedy, John Lennon, Victor Spinetti. All right, but look at the beautiful artwork on that. Is that not magnificent? I thought I'd show you.
That's amazing.
Okay, now getting back to your book, you're right about the Fab Four. Now, I think they've been together for something like 30 years or something. They're the world's #1 Beatle tribute band as far as I'm concerned. They're really great, and they're in the book too, you said. You interviewed him?
I did interview Ron McNeil. He told me his story of how they started and how they got famous.
I just interviewed Ron McNeil now, and you know he put together a group called Monkey Men. It's a tribute now to the Monkeys. I just interviewed that. It was fab. Anyway, the Fab Four right up there. That's the main thing. Now, I'm keen to know about all these fans and the crazy things that they did. Tell me what. They're doing it now. Is that what it is?
There's a pregnant mom in the book that delayed her emergency C-section by a full day so that the baby would be born on Paul's birthday.
Unbelievable.
And she named him Jude because she feels like Paul is more of a family member to her than her own family. She feels such a connection, and she's in her 30s.
Unbelievable. What about other fans?
Yeah, so there's David Stark, who's a music industry veteran at this point, but when he was a teenager in the 60s, he was a Beatle-obsessed fan like everybody else, and he would get himself in the right place at the right time.
Exactly.
He snuck into the premiere of Yellow Submarine and sat right behind the Beatles. And when the song Hey Bulldog was over, he said, "That's a great song." And Paul turned around and said, "Thank you." He knocked on Ringo's door and invited him out for a drink. Yeah. And Ringo said, I would, but I've got friends over right now. And Eric Clapton was one of the friends.
Yeah, and I just want to say, David's a friend of mine, and he went to Lulu's house and knocked on the door.
Yeah.
And then she told him
where Ringo
Ringo's house
lived.
was.
Yeah. Then there's I have a whole section on people that got up on stage with Paul McCartney and got his autograph on their body and then got it tattooed.
Unbelievable.
So a reader wrote a review, and I think this is the perfect synopsis of the book. She said, every Beatles fan's dream is to meet a Beatle and get a hug. And this book tells the story of the lucky ones who did.
I can't believe the amount of Beatle books that are coming out every day. Most of my interviews now have become with authors of Beatle books, and it's just fascinating how everyone does different angles on the Beatles and what they do. I've got a very good friend, right, Nigel Pearce in the UK, and what he's done is, over his relative's lifetime, she's collected everything from Apple because she used to work for EMI. So she collected all this stuff, and he's added to the collection, and he's just put out a book inside number 3, and people don't normally see items from Apple. And he's got the lot, which is unbelievable. So his book is a different angle, like your book is on a different angle with Superfans. Now, have you got any stories? I'm just saying from your research, in like 1964 of anything that happened. Like, I'll give you an example. When the Beatles came to Australia, it was 300,000 people came out in Adelaide, and nearly 100,000 came here at the Southern Cross when Jimmy Nicol was with them, and Ringo joined them to play Melbourne because Ringo did the concert, the Melbourne concert. This is the only place he came and flew in and did the actual concert with the other 3 Beatles. Up until that, Jimmy Nicol was doing all the concerts, the first Australian tour, New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I have a story from a fan who saw them in Cleveland. I can't remember. It was 1964 or 1965. But the fans rushed the stage to the point where they had to take the Beatles off the stage and get the fans back in their seats. They broke a fence down. They had to get the fence back up. People were climbing over each other. There was just debris all over the field. There was clothes. There was boots. And then this fan, since it was just such mayhem, when the Beatles came back on stage, she was able to get way up front and she touched Paul McCartney's boot. And then she was hit with a billy club by one of the police. So she was proud of her bruises the next day. And she's just really happy that she got to touch his boot. And she's been trying to do it again ever since.
Okay, what other stories have you heard about the Beatles? I'm just saying some of the most famous stories, because I'll tell you something that not a lot of people know, okay? And this is true. When Ringo arrived here in Melbourne, he was going to do the concert. He went to the Southern Cross or somewhere, and someone grabbed his Christopher medal. He had a medal, a Christopher something medal, right?
Saint Christopher?
A religious medal. Anyway, it was given to him as a present. I don't know if it was given to him when he was 21 or his 21st or whatever, but some fan ripped that, and he made a plea to get the medal back. And then the fan actually met Ringo and returned the cross and returned the medallion back to him, and that was a big deal. That was in the newspapers. A lot of people don't know about that story.
Yeah, so I talked to 4 Beatles channel DJs, and one of them was Dennis Elsis, who also is a radio icon in New York, has a long, famous career. So when he was the music director at a station called WNEW, which was a progressive FM radio station in the 70s, John Lennon visited him at the station for 2 hours and played DJ. He brought his own records. He talked about all the music. He told Beatles stories. So that whole interview, Dennis talking about that interview is in the book.
Surprise, surprise. It's Dr. Winston O'Boogie at your service. I am Dennis's surprise, actually.
And he didn't come out of a cake or anything like that. John Lennon is with us, and we'll spend some time this afternoon to talk about the new album and a whole bunch of things, and maybe even do some disc jockeying.
Yeah, it's my second favorite occupation.
We'll get into some good music.
Also, I talked to Peter Asher. I got to meet him in his home, lovely man. And he told stories about when Paul McCartney lived in the family's home because, as we all know, Jane Asher was Paul McCartney's first fiance. So he has amazing stories that Paul McCartney wrote, I Want to Hold Your Hand, in his basement.
Yeah.
And
yesterday upstairs, in his bedroom upstairs that was next to him, he wrote yesterday in Wimpole Street.
Yeah. So stories like that. It's not so much, facts about the Beatles. It's more stories around the Beatles. different fans that got to meet them and their impressions and that kind of thing.
It's great. I mean, that's a different angle altogether. And I mean, look how many fans there are now, new generation fans discovering the Beatles every day.
Yeah, well, International Beatles Week, there's 70 tribute bands from 20 countries, thousands and thousands of people from all over the world. I mean, the way I got the idea for this book, I went to Liverpool for the first time in about 2004. And, I was kind of a Beatles fan in a bubble. I didn't really know any other fans. And I got on the Magical Mystery Tour bus, and it was filled with fans from all around the world speaking different languages. And I just looked and thought, each of these people has their own story. And that's where it all started.
Can I ask, do you know Debbie Greenberg? She's a good friend of mine from Liverpool. She's written
Yeah,
a book
I've met
about
her.
the cavern.
I've met her at Beatlefest in New Jersey, and I have her book.
Yeah, she's fantastic, right?
Yeah,
Go out and buy her book about the cavern.
yeah.
So how long did it take to write this fantastic book?
It took 5 years, but it was the best 5 years of my life. I loved every single story. I'm the biggest fan in the world. So as people are telling me these stories, the excitement that they felt, I felt every minute of it. My kids couldn't stand to be in the room when I was doing an interview because it was just a lot of, oh my God, I can't believe it. Oh my God. So it was just so much fun. I'm sorry it ended. I'd love to write a sequel.
Now I've got to ask you, who's your favorite Beatle?
When I was a teenager, George, oh my God, George, he just had all the answers to all my questions, most beautiful man I've ever seen, and then when you get a little older, and life gets a little harder, you need a little more, upbeat happiness in your life. So you go for Paul, so George and Paul, I would say.
When you look back, and I'm just saying the 5 years that you spent, it was the labor of love to have the book now. Promoting the book and getting people to buy it and signing books and things like that. How much of a thrill is that? I mean, isn't that really what it's all about? Just interacting with fans, like new fans now that discover your book?
Yeah, it's just an amazing adventure. I just love meeting Beatles fans. Everyone is so warm. People that love the Beatles are just the nicest people you'll ever meet.
And when you went to Liverpool, I'm just saying, were you in awe of where they came from and their story?
The first time I went, I couldn't believe it was real. It was a trip to the promised land. And then when I was writing the book, I got to meet the people behind the tours, Cavern City Tours, who runs the Magical Mystery Tour bus and the Cavern Club. And they had amazing stories of how they got into all this. Bill Heckel, who's the co-director of Cavern City Tours, was telling me amazing stories from when he was 6 years old, and his teenage aunties would go see the Beatles play at the Cavern Club during their lunch. And one got fired from her job for always being late coming back from lunch, and the other skipped school for 4 months, and nobody knew. She would put on her miniskirt after her mother left, and she'd go see the Beatles at the Cavern.
Now, that's amazing because those two stories you've told me, I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
That really blows my mind. One lost their job and one didn't go to school for 4 months. That shows to me the impact that the Beatles really had even back then. And there's some photos that are surfaced now of the Beatles. I don't know if you saw it on the net from 1962. Some amazing photos. And you see the Beatles and they're so young.
Wow. Where can I see those?
Just go on the internet and type in photos from 1962.
Okay. Yeah. And then, I think one of my favorite stories is they saved this town, Walnut Ridge, Arkansas. Have you heard this story?
No, let's go for it.
Okay. So there's this little town in Arkansas, 5,400 people. And in 2010, they were almost bankrupt. And it turns out that in 1964, the Beatles secretly changed planes at a little tiny airport in Walnut Ridge. And when they were changing planes, some teenagers drove by and saw the Beatles getting out of the plane. And one of the teenagers was best friends with the president of the Beatles fan club. So word spread throughout the town. By the time the Beatles came back, everybody was waiting for the Beatles. There's amazing pictures because the current mayor's dad took pictures of the Beatles changing planes. So in my book, there's pictures from the Beatles changing planes in 1964. They're very rare. I don't know. They must have been published before, but it's nothing I've ever seen. So in 2010, when the town was almost bankrupt, they used that for a marketing plan, and they started a Beatles festival, and they made a 5-foot statue. I can't remember all the details. It's like a 20-foot statue of the Beatles crossing Abbey Road. Louise Harrison, George's sister, heard about it. Sadly, she passed away last year, but she got her band there, the Liverpool Legends, and now the town's thriving, all because of the Beatles.
Anyway, what else now is fascinating about your book is, apart from those photos, is there any more photos in the book?
Oh, there's tons of photos. Every fan that got on stage, there's photos of them with Paul on stage. There's photos of Beatles channel DJs with different Beatles. On the anniversary of Abbey Road, there was a party outside in the streets, and there was a Beatles tribute band member who plays Paul, and it was a huge party, and there was press and there was crowds, and he got down on one knee on the crosswalk at Abbey Road and proposed to his girlfriend, and it made the national news because all the photographers were there.
Dana, tell me where all the fans can buy the book on the internet, the links.
Oh, on Amazon, on Books A Million, on Thrift Books, on my publisher's website, McFarland Publishing.
Now, I'm just going to ask you, of all the super fans, I mean, I'm just saying, you must be one of them too. But
oh, man, I am the biggest fan. I thought I was the biggest fan. I thought I knew so much, but I knew nothing. And I still don't know half of what everybody else seems to know.
So who is the biggest super fan with the writing of your book? Who is the one that really stands out as what, gee, that's a major Beatles super fan?
Okay, so there's Maria Tuttle, who, she has some amazing stories. The one that gave me the biggest chills was she screamed out, "I love you, Paul," at a stadium concert, and he said, "I love you too. I'm dying." And every summer, she and her husband rent a house out in Montauk and ride their bikes around the summer home that Paul has out there, just hoping to catch a glimpse. And they've seen Mary and Stella, and they've been, within a week, they leave and then they find out he's there a week later, but they've never seen him at his house.
Now that we've got the Beatlemania lives on from the Superfans, what project would you like to write another book on?
I'd love to write a book on Beatles collectibles and Beatles collections.
That's a subject I know something about, right? Having grown up in the 60s and being a baby boomer and first fan. I mean, in 1964, I was 6 years old, but I've seen a lot of collectibles in my lifetime that were for sale at that time. Even if we were 6, like the plastic Beatle wigs they had here in Australia.
Sure, yeah.
And things like that. And what I'll do is I'll be happy to put you in touch with some Beatle collectors. And these people are worldwide big Beatle collectors, because I do a show called Plastic EP's Super Beatle Collectors. So have a look at that on the net, everybody. Just type that in, Plastic EP's Super Beatle Collectors. Now, Dana, I just want to say it's been fascinating, and I love your work, and I love what you're doing. I love your dedication. I love your love for the Beatles. And to say what you've done and how you've done it in 5 years, it's a labor of love. Really, it's come down to that, hasn't it?
I wish it never ended. Maybe I'll just, I probably should do a sequel.
No, you got it. And as I said, interacting with fans. But that must give you the greatest satisfaction as an author, that people read your book, come back to you and talk to you about it. That's what it's all about.
It's a thrill. It's a thrill to be known among fans. It's a thrill to be a fan and be in the Beatles world.
Thanks again, Dana, for being on the show. Want everyone out there to go and buy your book. There it is. Beatlemania lives on. It's there. Go and buy it. There is a bit psychedelic. Go out there, buy it, enjoy it. It's fantastic. And we salute you for your fantastic book, Dana.